welcome back. We're glad you're into part 2 of the Introduction to Marketing in Chapter 1, and how in recreation, tourism, leisure, recreation organizations, we are embracing the marketing concept and tools more and more, but that we still have a ways to go. So that first section of the video and PowerPoint, I tried to share in that first chapter too, that we are in evolution, that marketing is and will continue to change, and the real question is, have our organizations changed along with that? So to summarize and continue to move forward in this chapter, I want to first share again why we have this little but growing interest, just briefly. And first of all, again, we know in our organizations the literature is just still quite young. Not till the 80s and 90s do we see that erupting. Nonprofit agencies historically in our field felt really little need, where today they do feel need, and they know they're running organizations with the same kinds of practices of for-profit businesses, just with a different objective. So there's no longer serving everyone. We are serving, none of us are serving everyone. And I can show and share how every nonprofit agency, although they think they want to utilize everyone, strategically shouldn't be under the premise of everyone is their market and they should try and reach everyone, because they will fail. Since the 90s, again, accreditation issues, as I mentioned in the first section. So we weren't required to teach you about marketing concepts until the 1990s. It's no wonder, again, that many of our organizations don't fully understand or embrace the concept. Many agencies do believe they're integrating marketing, yet few really are doing it from this 21st century kind of perspective. And in this section of our chapter, I want to highlight this, evolution of history we've gone through, and really start zoning in on, from your interview, maybe in the field, as well as your perspective. Are we there? Are we really in a 21st century kind of mode today? And more importantly, what's marketing look like in the future? So as we do that, and again, recognizing that people really like this topic now. Marketing is a hot issue, and I mentioned in our last section kind of the buzzwords and the things that are really important to people, but we're going to look at it again from a very strategic and a very tactical approach to use this powerful tool in the most advantageous way that we can. So what is marketing? And in the chapter 1, I do kind of formally defined a fairly long-winded definition of marketing. So I'll always just find it important that you think about all these elements and why I've put them in the definition, not so much that I'll say to you, restate this definition. I want you to think of your own definition, and how would you explain what marketing really is to an organization that you're working for in our field? Do they really understand how it fits in? And I want you to think about that during our time here right now. So what is marketing? The best definition I ever saw someone put on my desk, and I can't even tell you who the author is. But if the circus is coming to town and you paint a sign saying, "Circus coming to the fairground Saturday," we call that advertising, right? We're reaching the people. But if you put the sign on the back of an elephant and you walk them through town, that's a promotion. And actually, that's when the circus came to Grand Rapids, as an example. That's actually what they did. They went from DeVos, or Van Andel Arena, I should say, Van Andel Arena, down through Restaurant Row, I call that, and they'd take the elephants down through there, and people would just walk out of buildings and see that. And it was a great way to get attention, and very unique. Now, quite recently, the elephants aren't coming to town anymore with the circus, but that's a whole separate issue, and so work with me on this example. If the elephant walked through the mayor's flower bed, we call that publicity, but if the mayor laughs about it, we call that public relations, because public relations is positive media attention that we get for free. But if you planned that whole thing, we call that marketing. So marketing is really about strategy, and the tactical things are very smart decisions by an organization. So I love that quick example when we try to capture what we mean by strategy and tactics together. It's a lot of things we're doing, but we're doing them for a very smart and wise reason. So So as we look at that formal definition, it's integrating effective strategic and operational communication concepts and practices driven by various people in an organization that influence us and really practiced by everyone. So I hope in the first section you really started to think more about places you've worked and how they approach marketing. And my guess is you're going to find that they look at it kind of narrowly. It's usually one person's job in an organization, and you just say, oh, they're the marketer, versus everyone's the marketer. Hope some of you, and you need to email me or call me and tell me if you work for an organization that really gets on their job descriptions that every one of us is a marketer. So, but also the decisions tend to be by that one person who might have the job, or the small team of people who are the marketing sales team. That it's not thought of that everyone should have a chance to be involved in those decisions. Time and time again, I utilize a kind of a tool that people make decisions on their own, and then in a group setting, they make them together. And 95% of the time, the group makes better decisions than the individual. And I venture to say in your life, in my life too, when I think about that, when I have a group of people around helping me make a decision, that decision is always better because I have so much talent in the people that and you facilitate a conversation that even though that conversation might not be easy to hear or facilitate, the outcome generally most often is more powerful than alone. So with that, to think of involving everyone and everyone's job description knowing, and if we all thought of ourselves as marketers and we were all feeling like we were engaged in the process kind of idea, and I say not only employees and consumers or visitors, but also our volunteers, our board members, our suppliers, our donors, all the people who have a vested interest in what we do. So we call those stakeholders, and I want you to think very broadly about all the people in the organizations you've worked for that have an influence, and I bet they could have helped with that marketing process. So marketing today, again, defined, again, long-winded, I'll give it to you, I agree, but several kind of key words I don't want you to forget. Everyone involved, everyone practices it, strategic elements that are both operational and communication oriented. Creating the best experience for Bill Shepler on the ferry boat required his captains, his deckhands, his ticket takers, his staff, operational people to make that experience so worthwhile that I talked about in the first part. But then we had to communicate that experience to people and tell them we were doing the ferry boat ride that goes under the bridge. If we had the best operational things but never told anybody about it, we would fail. So marketing involved strategically gathering the data and information to even think about that, operationally implementing a really high quality experience, and then communicating that to people so they come. In that, marketing can no longer be this one little department and thought of, oh, run down to the marketing person and go ask them to do that for us. No, marketing has to be integrated throughout that organization. So having said that, as we move forward, the practices will ultimately deliver high quality experiences to reach and exceed the expectation of the people we serve. And we serve employees, we serve volunteers, we serve donors, we serve board members, right? And we serve the external guest. So always focused on our organizational objectives, very metric oriented, very measurement oriented, evaluating our decisions to see if they've produced that return, because I don't want to be that organization that when things get tough, they go, oh, let's eliminate marketing because it just costs us money. No, we want to know and prove our value and worth and show the return of investment. And when we fail and make poor decisions, we don't want to do those time and time again. And I've seen that a lot in our organizations where we keep doing the coupon book again, but we don't even know if the coupon book is worth it. It just feels good because we're making decisions, right? We're doing things, but I want to do the right things. I want a career that's done the right things, that has allowed me to feel really good about my decisions, but also reap the benefit of those decisions. A more successful organization. I'm more proud of my work in the field, etc. Okay, so things to think about where you've worked, what you've done, what you think about marketing. I hope already we're influencing your thoughts on the whole idea of where our industry is and maybe where we should be. So let's start with the idea of how a company is created. And the idea here is to think about okay, where should marketing be? And if we think about it, companies are first created, or organizations, because there's some need out there. You're living in a town that doesn't have great fine dining, restaurants. You're living in a town that has nothing to do. You're sitting around your kitchen table and you're going, geez, someone should invent this, right? So because we need it and no one's made it before. So the whole idea is every great organization should be formed around the idea that we can do this better, we can do this at all because it's never been done before. But the whole idea that people need something, and they've told us because we've asked them, do you need this? And if you do, then let's give it to you, kind of idea. But you can't do that alone. There are a lot of businesses that die right at the kitchen table, kind of idea. They're really clever ideas and really smart because people need them, but they don't get off the ground. And generally, I say to you, why is that? Great ideas, great thoughts, because you need something else. A great thought can't get implemented until you have some things. So the second thing we know we need to create an organization is a great concept, a great experience, something people need and want, right? But we also need resources to do that. So we know stockholders, shareholders, donors, deep pockets, might be your deep pockets, might be somebody else's, but we need investors. We need capital to actually make this happen, whether capital to create the products or services, capital to build a building, but we're going to need a resource. So a lot of ideas die before they ever get that capital or resource to have happen. But we know, again, even when we get the capital, we can't do it without the people, kind of idea. So the three-pronged approach are employees or shareholders or volunteers. Employees is a loose term here. To then go back to the top and go back to the customer, the external person who wants to consume what we're doing. So on a simple level, I think of, organizations are really created with those things, a really core great experience or great idea that has investors or resources available to them to do and create it, but then has the high quality person to deliver it. Because again, remember, the base of all great marketing is what? Oh, I heard ya. It's the quality of the experience. You're right. So all of those ingredients are key. We get the big data to understand needs, make sure we're creating something of value that people want. We get the investors and we deliver it in a high way. So it only makes sense to me that marketing is situated in the middle of that. And our job is to find out what people need, right? To help get investors and create information and find the great people to help deliver that. And our job should be to support all of those endeavors in the organization to be as effective as possible. But typically we don't see that in organizations, and I'll get to that in just one second. So over time, we don't see that because we see how marketing, if I pick up a textbook from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000, you're going to see changes over time. And what we're talking about is different. It goes back to what I said in part one, that the book I wrote was outdated the minute it went to press. And that's what we'll see. And so I've cut to the chase here and gave you a couple paragraphs about each kind of decade or so, but let me just summarize that in this quick table. So we see in the 1960s in this first column, you'll note again that we're very product oriented. We're mass marketing to everyone. We're selling widgets, we're selling glasses, that we make, and then we go, let's go find the people. Well, everybody needs glasses, so let's go sell them to everyone, kind of idea. You'll read very little strategy in the 60s. You don't see textbooks talking about, really strategic about how they go about. It was more about create something and they will come, or go find them, kind of idea. And it's really about my opinion as the manufacturer and come find me idea. But by the 80s, we already saw the information about marketing being looked at a little differently. We saw the word service being implemented. So again, keep in mind, our industry being largely service oriented, right, and intangible kind of experiences aren't even talked about until the 80s in marketing textbooks. And we started to read about segments of business. Now, I was a marketer in the 80s full time. That's when I did it. And I worked for a monster, corporation, a worldwide organization called Marriott, and working for Marriott, I had that luxury because we had really sophisticated marketing even back then. So I feel very lucky that I had a chance to work and learn from an organization that was really sophisticated. And we talked about marketing segments back then, but there weren't a lot of other organizations talking about it. And even today, I'd suggest to you, we work in HTM organizations that don't think of themselves as anything but trying to serve everyone. Less and less are thinking that way. And at least now we more think along the lines our people are segmented into certain groups because they think about our product or experience differently. You know, a senior citizen is going to think about my amusement park a little differently than a family of young children under 5. And they're going to think about it differently than the group of teenagers that are coming from their school, you know, or their church. So we know that people are different. What we think about in the 80s, though, is we were very kind of war-oriented. In terms of competition, we just tried to devour the competition. That was kind of our whole objective. You know, we weren't really thinking strategically in the 60s, but by the 80s, we're like, oh, we get this. This is like war. We'll just go after the other guy. So even in the 80s, during my career, you know, we saw a lot more price war kinds of things. You know, this hotel would charge $99, so I'd say, geez, oh, Pete, we can beat that. We'll go to $80. Well, what we realized during war is maybe no one kind of wins in that related to running an organization. You know, price wars erode the market to such that the consumer might win short term, but they're not going to win long term because the quality of services are going to be impacted as a result of all that. So what's the right price for the right kinds of services and the fair price that the market is willing to buy? We just have changed, thank goodness, off of the war mentality, and it's been moving forward. So back in the 80s, we also, though, realized that we should talk to customers. We should ask them what they think about our experience. And I'd like to say that back then we started the survey after the experience, and we really looked at kind of, we created the experience, but then we at least measured how they felt about it. And that's when that, you know, comment cards and surveys after the experience kind of started. Again, varying degrees across our field, who adopted that early and who adopted it late. But we saw that evident in HTM back in the 80s. So by 2000, I'd like to say the literature at least talked about, and textbooks talked about, marketing in 2000 was all about an experience. And we've seen that thrown around now, but it's already 2015. So for 15 years, you know, we wrote about this back in early 2000 about it's no longer as product or service, but people are really looking for these emotionally engaging experiences that do more than just provide a service. They change people. They impact people. And in no other industry I can think of than hospitality and tourism and recreation and leisure have we got that opportunity and made it easier. You know, you see insurance companies trying to say that come to our insurance company and we're going to change your life. Well, they have a much harder time at trying to do that than someone who's working in a resort or a food service establishment or designing the Cherry Festival, you know, the National Cherry Festival, and providing an event to people. We innately have the kinds of things that can be life-changing and very emotionally driven for people. So I like that at least the literature started to help us recognize that, but we have a much easier job. And you know, if you look at the old MasterCard commercials where they're talk about priceless experiences, they were largely based in our industry. Go to a ball game with your child and create the experience, but spend it all on MasterCard kind of idea. But those commercials, and you start to see, I imagine, some of the hot communication items that you're pulling right now in Chapter 1 for our assignment, you're probably finding that it's organizations who've created an experience out of it. Certainly some of the beer companies, certainly you know, some of the Coke and beverage companies, they're really good with national advertising, making it a life-changing thing as a result of drinking that beverage. So look at those things, but we're all not there yet. We all aren't ready to operationally create these magical experiences for our visitors, and that's a shame, but we'll hopefully get there. But 2000, you know, 21st century started target marketing certainly too. We certainly read it in the literature. No longer it was just recognizing we had segments, but we were strategic in the literature about targeting groups of people. I really, whether I was for-profit or non-profit, did only look at certain groups of people. I didn't want to serve everybody. I recognize they're in different groups, but now I am just going after senior citizens who live 60 miles away who have interest in fitness and wellness and socialization, as an example. So targeted markets were the hot thing in 21st century marketing. And again, I venture to say our industry dabbles in target marketing. We might know we have groups of people we're going after, but we still could get much more sophisticated with that whole concept. Partnerships instead of no strategy or a war strategy, now we really have a much healthier way of going about thinking about how we strategize in terms of our competition, and we look now at partnering or niching ourselves and not devouring each other, but finding our place in that sea of offerings. So I'll use the fitness industry as an example, and in any one town, even small towns, you'll have multiple fitness providers, and slowly we've seen this emergence of finding their niche in that field versus just trying to be like each other and devour each other. So I love the concept of Curves as an example. Curves came in and looked around the fitness industry and said, okay, we could all create the same kind of fitness facilities and places for the hardcore fitness user between the ages of 20 and 50. And we can do that and just create new ones and twist it and tweak it. Or we can look at who's not being served. What group of people looking around the room out of all people who might have fitness interest, but are there barriers to them going to those atypical historic places? And Curves sat around and said, how about women? How about women that are out of shape necessarily, and women who are not only out of shape, but wouldn't be caught dead in a typical fitness center because they don't have the outfit and they don't want to wear the outfit. They might want to come in their khakis or their jeans, and you know what? And they don't want to stay for an hour and a half and make this whole, but they'd like to be healthier. They'd like to live better, but or in a way, I shouldn't say better, but I should say in a long-term, healthier, feel better maybe kind of way. But I'm not going in a fitness center like that. And Curves realized there was a market out there, and they created the product and experience for that market. And to me, it's a brilliant way of thinking about partnering in a way, because they're not going after the same market. They're in the same industry though, and they could do a lot of collaborative kind of things, because maybe they could take that Curves market they're going after and then get them to a place that they might be ready to go into those kind of fitness places. And so I see some logical partnerships, and I think in our industry we have more and more opportunities to partner not only with maybe a competitor, but certainly an indirect competitor. So now as a hotel, I partner with a restaurant, and I partner with an amusement park or an attraction or a museum or a entertainment venue. And more we do things that instead of fighting each other, let's pull it together and do something better as a result. So we've certainly seen some movement in that direction. It's really an exciting area. I think that's such a healthy, good, powerful way of looking at our industry when we are very segmented as an industry, but we need each other. There isn't one of us that can do it alone without all of those providers, from transportation and travel to get there, to attractions, to food service, to lodging, to gas stations, to merchandise, etc. So way cool way to think about it. And then in 2000, we really saw literature talking about being scientific and customized in regards to consumers. So in the 80s, if we were just asking them after the experience, by 2000, now we're asking them before the experience. So the example I gave earlier with Sheplers was what we mean. Let's talk about, get them involved in the experience with us in terms of deciding what we want to do. And then we ask them and we do it. Guess what? It's going to be way easier to get them to come to us in that way. It's kind of like the whole employees involved and volunteers involved in marketing decisions. Well, it's no different in terms of the customer experience. Get the customers involved in it, and guess what? They will come. So, and it'll be the right thing to offer. So on a simple level, I say there are a couple things in marketing I would never run an organization without doing. And one is talking to the people, for one. Whether it's formal research or having dialogue, but letting our customers, our employees, our volunteers be involved in decisions about our operations. Point one. Two is understand who our competition is and understand what they're doing inside and out. Remember the ferry boat visit? How was I about to make a decision about how to help Sheplers Ferry market themselves if I didn't know what those other experiences were like? couldn't find their niche or our competitive advantage in the sea of offerings until you do your homework. So if I can help them get data or big data about customers, about competition, about what we're doing, what we're not doing, etc., that kind of scientific and customized feedback is critical anymore. So we started hearing about it in 2000, but boy, today I wouldn't run an organization without that kind of insight, because it makes it so much easier to make these decisions. And I want to be effective at my decisions. Remember, we're all going to spend a marketing budget, but I want to spend it really well and produce those outcomes. So the real question for today is, what does 2020 look like? I mean, it is literally around the corner for one, but what is movement in those four categories? We went from a product, a service, an experience to what next? We go from mass to segmented to targeted to what? You know, history tells us it's going to change, and if we're not ready and anticipating those changes, I want to be on the forefront of thinking about that